Welcome back to Just Chattin', and this is the series of videos we do on Thursday and Sunday evenings just for our own entertainment. So for all you Audie fans, I know exactly where that cat is. I was trying to change my bed sheets today, and Audie knows what that means, so he hopped up on the bed, just threw himself there and basically said, "Come on in, change the sheets. I'll help you." So that was hours ago. He has not moved. He's still waiting for me to go back, change the sheets so he can help. And that, by the way, is his idea of a really good time because, there are sheets and you toss the sheets about as you're putting them on the bed. And that's a whole lot of stuff for a cat to play with as he pretends to help. So yeah, I'm going to have to just bribe him to go somewhere else so I can get that bed changed. But in the meantime, I know exactly where he is, and he'll be there until eventually I go back in and give him what he wants. So we're going to take a quick look at the intro, and we will be right back. Quick disclaimer before we get started. As many of you know, I live about a quarter of a mile from a very large horse farm where they do shows and give riding lessons and so on. And it looks like this weekend they're having a show because there are large vehicles with horse trailers in tow going up and down the street. And yes, one of the country noises, but I do have to say that horses whinnying in the backs of trailers is probably among the more pleasant of the noises we cope with out in the boonies like this. So I have to ask for your patience, and certainly I'm not going to go out and scold the horses, but I do think they are having the horse show. All right, on to the topic. Well, I am sick to death of the Montecito morons, and I have been for a while. So I wanted to step away from those two and take a look at the other royal couple who is vying for the title of most embarrassing royals ever, and just check in on Andrew and Fergie. And there are a couple of reasons for this. One, Andrew and Fergie are kind of the coal-mined canaries. They are the ones who are walking point on this whole adventure in how the royal family is going to cope with their embarrassing siblings. Right now, it's Charles coping with his kid brother. Before too long, it's going to be William coping with his kid brother. And what goes on with the Yorks is probably going to have some impact on what will eventually be done about the Sussexes. I think that the Yorks are going to form the template for how the royal family deals with Nutmeg and the sock puppet. And whatever mistakes they make with the Yorks, it's not likely they will be repeating those mistakes with the Sussexes. So let's just see what's going on with the Yorks. Now, recently, this photo came out, and it's showing Andrew with a pretty conspicuous black eye. Now, I've seen a lot of versions of this exact photo, and I have to say, in some printings of the photo, it seems more obvious that he has a black eye than in others, and that leads me to believe that someone is enhancing the photos. Same photo, one photo will show what looks like it might be a bruise, another photo looks like it's a real shiner. So, no one has said what happened, how this happened. Did he slip and fall in the shower? Did he go off on a drunk? Nobody knows. But I do think that Andrew seems to be well, taking advantage of what he is hoping, I would imagine, would be public sympathy. And he is now putting out the word that he is the person in the royal family who is at the greatest risk of physical harm. Apparently, he had some confrontation with a homeless person. I'm not sure of the details. The details are very fuzzy about this. But apparently, Andrew encountered a homeless person. It's like, oh, poor baby, you encountered a genuine homeless person. But Andrew is seeing this as a security breach. Now, he is not temperamentally suited to accepting the fact that he's not important enough to be considered a target by anybody, not even a homeless person. So I think Andrew's barking up the wrong tree there, but it certainly does show the direction his thinking is taking. We have that on one side. Then we have Fergie on the other. Now, Fergie has been dropping hints that she wants to tell her story and thereby raising money because she's broke. She has nowhere to live, and she's just forced out in the streets, poor Fergie. Now, the reality is, as we all know, and as Fergie has proven herself, no matter how much money you drop in this woman's lap, she is going to squander it, and she's going to be broke 20 minutes later, and she is going to be doing some pretty reprehensible things in order to get money. And we're not just talking about proposing marriage to Jeffrey Epstein, which I have to say is probably, well, when it comes to reprehensible things for money, that is pretty high on the list. But we all know about the scandal, the pay for access that sting that she was caught up in when she was offering to hook a pretend Middle Eastern sheikh up with Andrew in exchange for a hefty cash payment. And Fergie gets into trouble like this all the time. And what she does when she's caught red-handed is she just does a full mea culpa. She just beats her breast and says, yes, I have poor judgment. I was in a bad place. I was just completely in the gutter. I shouldn't have done it. I'm so sorry. I could just be so idiotic sometimes. And everybody forgives her, or at least that's the general story. Apparently, Fergie is now sort of shopping this book deal around in the vicinity of King Charles, with the whole notion of, well, if somebody gave me money, I wouldn't have to tell it all to Oprah or Netflix or whoever's going to pay me the bucks for it. So that sort of, I can only call that extortion. That's the only word that applies. But I do have to say it's alleged. I have seen nothing that absolutely proves conclusively this is what she's up to. But these are the rumors floating around in their circles, that she is looking for the best deal she can get. And if Charles will pay her to shut up, great. And if he doesn't, then she's got what she feels is a whole lot of dirt she can sell. Now, the downside of that is Fergie has not been part of the inner royal circle for a very long time, because Andrew has not been part of the inner royal circle for a very long time. Beatrice and Eugenie, I don't know, we'll get into them in a minute. But there's not a lot Fergie has to tell. At one point, she was close to Diana, but she blew that one because she made statements when she wrote her first autobiography that Diana didn't like, things that Diana did not want made public, that Fergie made public. Now, I don't know what exactly those things were, or, what bee Diana had in her bonnet. To be fair, this breach between the two of them took place in the 90s, and Diana's state of mind had been deteriorating at that point, and even her own brother said she had become very paranoid. So who knows? I would imagine there are two sides to that story. But in any case, Fergie does not have new news. The most Fergie could throw out there would be some things that may or may not have happened 30 years ago. And I say may or may not because Fergie is not a credible source. She will tell whatever story she feels presents her in the best light. Just throwing that out there. So Andrew is complaining about not having enough security. Fergie is complaining about not having enough money. And apparently the new plan, and I do love this, is the two of them together are going to go off to Dubai. Now, I have to tell you, I find this very, very credible. Not that they're going to do it, but that they would be mooting this as a viable plan. Because Andrew had a lot of connections of the seedier sort when he was the British trade envoy and was dealing in the Middle East. And in fact, some of those connections apparently passed along to Beatrice and Eugenie. Again, get into that later. But I think Andrew believes he would get a favorable reception in the Middle East. I'm not so sure about that because, in fact, Dubai, which is their target, is going through some very rough economic times right now. I don't think Andrew even knows what a rough economic time is because, frankly, he's in a world of his own. He lives somewhere where everybody else deals with his needs. The man does not have to get up and make his own cup of tea in the morning. Somebody else is going to do it for him. He doesn't even have to rearrange his own teddy bears. Someone does that for him too. So, is he going to recognize other people's economic hardships? Not likely. So, I do think they're thinking about it. Do I think it's likely to happen? Maybe not. It could very well be that people in the Middle East might take them in on the theory that they could eventually be useful one way or another. But remember, the people they're talking about, these oil sheikhs that they want to go visiting for an indefinite and fully paid by the oil sheikhs vacation, they're businessmen. These are people who are going to look to their own financial interests, their own dealings, what's good for them, what's good for their country, what's good for oil. Andrew and Fergie have very, very little to offer them at this moment. Are they interested in Fergie's palace gossip? Not likely. They're businessmen. What do they care about that sort of thing? Are they interested in the possibility that Andrew might eventually become useful in the future? Maybe. Maybe. If Andrew could convince him that there's a way back into the fold for himself and his wife, maybe he could persuade someone to take him in on that basis. I don't know. But I don't think that Dubai is a legitimate option for them. Don't think that. But I do think they view it as such. So I do think this could be their plan. Whether or not they can bring that plan to fruition, that's another story altogether. So now, let's move on to the York princesses. Well, there are definitely some problems going on there. Eugenie and Beatrice both maintain grace and favor residences in London. Meanwhile, Eugenie actually maintains a home in Portugal, and Beatrice apparently maintains a home somewhere in the UK. I think the Cotswolds, they said. Regardless, these London residences are not owned by them. They are crown properties, and when you are given a residence like this, you're given the use of the residence, and you will pay a below market rent for it. That's usually the way the grace and favor apartments work. Beatrice and Eugenie are not paying their own rent. Charles is apparently paying it for them. Now, Charles is allegedly paying this rent out of his personal income, the privy purse, his money from the Duchy of Lancaster. And the notion, and I find this laughable, I truly do, the notion that Charles's money is somehow separate from taxpayer funds is just a joke. And here's the reason for that. It's all well and good to say that's his private money and he voluntarily pays taxes for it. But he does. That is a voluntary agreement. The income from the Duchy of Lancaster is taxed on a voluntary basis, meaning Charles and his accountants, because I don't imagine Charles is doing this on his own, are going to determine how much money they pay taxes on. They're going to deduct what they want from expenses and say, well, this is the amount on which we are paying taxes. And it's not the entire amount. And keep in mind, the rent that's being paid is not full market rent. So even at that, we're still looking at reduction on reduction on reduction. And guess who picks up the dime for all those reductions? Any penny, even a penny, that the royal family do not pay in taxes is a penny that comes from the taxpayers. The government has to run, and if the government needs money and the royal family is not paying their fair share, and by the way, they are not, because for starters, they don't even have to pay inheritance tax, which the rest of the British public, and seriously, everybody else has to pay. They don't have to pay inheritance tax. Guess what that means? That means in order to cover the tax they are not paying, the British public has to pay that much more in their own tax bill. So I find it a joke when people say, but it's not taxpayer money. It's coming out of the privy purse. No. In the end, it's coming out of the taxpayer's pocket, simply because this giant pool of money, that's the money that runs the government, pays to keep the roads repaired, the water pipes flowing, the military to defend the borders. All of that has to be paid. And if the royal family is not paying, somebody else is. So it just, ultimately, that is fundamental economics. Charles is paying for the rent, but so are the taxpayers. And I'm not surprised that people are irritated that Beatrice and Eugenie, who have more than one home, are getting properties at reduced rents that are being paid by Charles out of money that is not being fully taxed. Sure, you can see where this is all going. This is just, it's bookkeeping. It's taking one from column A, tossing it over to column B, but in the end, when there is a shortfall, it's the taxpayers who will be picking it up. So that is starting to get noticed. And at this point, what we have is a family, Andrew and Fergie, plus the two York princesses, that they are inextricably linked in terms of their past dealings, and people are very quick to say that Beatrice and Eugenie have not been implicated in any of their parents' wrongdoing. Oh, that's completely incorrect. They have been implicated. They have been implicated again and again. They have not been proven guilty. There have been no serious allegations with serious support brought, but they have certainly been implicated. And there is certainly grounds for legitimate investigation. So this is where we're at right now. Will Andrew and Fergie go to the royal family and say, look, you take care of our girls and we'll quietly slip away to Dubai? I think that's probably what's on the horizon for the two of them. Will it work? Who knows? Who knows? With Charles at the helm, anything is possible. Absolutely anything is possible. He may well pay for the expenses to relocate Andrew and Fergie. So I would not be surprised, in fact, if he did, because apparently Charles is a real pushover at this point. I feel sorry for the man, but the fact of the matter is he's a pushover. And I do think that before the throne passes to William, the Republicans in the UK, and by the way, those are not the same as American Republicans. The Republicans in the UK are the anti-monarchy party. I think they are going to be gaining an awful lot of support from the average Brits, because at this point, the monarchy is not either cleaning up its own house or protecting its own long-term interests. And the royal family's main function in society is to stand as the epitome of all that is good and noble about Britannia. And if they can't do that, then a lot of people are going to be asking, what are they here for? So I did want to share that. I thought it would be interesting to take a look at what's going on with Andrew and Fergie, and to just check in on what's happening with the York princesses and the extent to which they are being subsidized by Charles and therefore by the taxpayers. Don't lose sight of that. And none of these people are working royals. Fergie isn't even technically part of the family anymore. So yeah, I can understand why people are getting upset. All right, that is what I have for you today. We are going to take a look at a slideshow on the way out. Thank you for being with us. I hope to see you next time. And in the meanwhile, have a terrific day.